I talked to one of the organizers of the rally, Stacy Bannerman, whose husband served in Iraq.
You realize that within the last 48 hours, I've gotten notification that 2 more of my friends' children have died because of injuries that they sustained in Iraq. We need to get out of that country. The scandal is that Americans' lifeblood and hundreds of billions of dollars are being sent to sustain an occupation that was never needed for a war based on lies. Why did you think we had to go into Iraq?
Well, all of the intelligence available to us suggested that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. Not only available to us, but available to the United Nations, to the French, to the Germans. Even Hans Blix, the inspector, believed that Saddam was hiding things. We all believe that. Which is why I object to referring to some of the things that were said before the war as lies.
The lie I referred to is the lie that was sold to the American people that invading Iraq was somehow directly related to the attacks on America. That was a manipulation of the fear and the sorrow and the pain of the American people.
I didn't hear statements to the effect that Iraq was responsible for 9/11. I did hear the argument, which I think is a valid argument, that weapons of mass destruction in the hands of dictators who have relationships with terrorists poses a danger to the United States, and one that we have to find a response to. Sadly, we allowed the liberation of Iraq to become an occupation, and we waited far too long to hand sovereignty to the Iraqis themselves. But to reverse our path now and abandon the battlefield would hand victory to the thugs who used to run Iraq, to death squads funded by Iran, and to the holy warriors of al-Qaeda.
Where we've got the American troops right now is Iraq, and I think we need to stay as much as possible focused on that conversation. These shoes and these boots that represent so many thousands of lives lost. How do you feel when you see this?
Well, I regret every lost life. There's no question about that.
Do you know the names of any of them?
You're saying that it is never justified to lose a life in combat.
I'm saying that by any measure of a just or moral war, Iraq is not it by any measure whatsoever.
How would you define a just or a moral war?
A just war means that there is a clear and compelling need, that it is not a war based on choice. This clearly was a war based on choice. There was no imminent threat or danger to the United States of America or its people. Furthermore, a just war is one in which the vast majority, 90% or more of the casualties, are not the innocent, unarmed civilians and women and children of Iraq. Those are some basic fundamental measures of a just war, and by each and every one, this is not a just war.
You're saying bring the troops home now with the job undone, with the near certainty of the collapse of a democratically elected regime, and nothing but failure to atone for. I don't believe that's fair to them. I stayed and talked to the demonstrators for an hour and a half.
Perle, thank you.
Because of their loss, these parents, wives, brothers, and sisters have moral standing. They deserve our sympathy, and they certainly deserve to be heard. But I believe the case for intervening in Iraq was and remains valid. I've heard many times the assertion that there was no link between Iraq and terrorism, and that assertion is simply false. Abu Nidal, a well-known terrorist, lived and worked in Baghdad with the full support of the government of Iraq. We know that Saddam Hussein's intelligence apparatus trained al-Qaeda terrorists. We saw the training facilities, and we have testimony from people who were there when the training took place. There were dozens of links between terrorist activity, terrorist organizations, Saddam Hussein's intelligence apparatus, and even al-Qaeda. And the people who say there were no such links are simply wrong. Leading politicians from both political parties believed in Saddam's sponsorship of terrorism before the invasion of Iraq. They might want to forget it today, but at the time, prominent Democrats, including Hillary Clinton, spoke out.
Intelligence reports show that Saddam Hussein has worked to rebuild his chemical and biological weapons stock, his missile delivery capability, and his nuclear program. He has also given aid, comfort, and sanctuary to terrorists, including al-Qaeda members.
Many people think I'm a conservative or neoconservative Republican, but I remain a registered Democrat, as I have been all my life. The first political campaign I worked on was in 1960. The candidate I worked for reflected my view then and my view now.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
that you will faithfully execute the office of...
I was a student volunteer who worked in JFK's presidential campaign.
President of the United States.
Today I am still moved by the words I first heard when I was 19 years old.
Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
If President Bush had given Jack Kennedy's inaugural address, he would have been denounced as hopelessly unrealistic, as an imperialist, as a dreamer. In fact, he would have been denounced as a neoconservative.
Holy.
Oh my God!
On September 11, the Twin Towers in New York were destroyed, and so was the American belief that it was safe behind two great oceans. We discovered on that day how vulnerable we were. And on that day, President Bush said that we would not distinguish between the terrorists who committed that act and the states that harbored them. I've come to Afghanistan, the base for the al-Qaeda terrorists who attacked us. They were virtually part of the Taliban regime, Islamist extremists who carried out public executions and imposed their fundamentalist beliefs by force. Their agenda was brutal and backward. They prohibited music and banned the education of women. When the Taliban refused to deliver Osama bin Laden, we went to war to destroy their regime. Today, 5 years after the Taliban were thrown out, I'm seeing the new Kabul. This morning, I'm visiting one of Kabul's most famous schools for girls. Since the fall of the Taliban, it's come back to life. Islamic fundamentalist regimes deprive half their population, women, of the most basic human rights, the right to work, to form relationships with whom they choose, and the right to an education. Today, the girls play sports and explore the internet, activities that were unthinkable under the Taliban.